James Grover Thurber was an American cartoonist, author, journalist, playwright, and celebrated wit. Thurber was best known for his cartoons and short stories, published mainly in the New Yorker magazine and collected in his numerous books. One of the most popular humorists of his time, Thurber celebrated the comic frustrations and eccentricities of ordinary people. In collaboration with his college friend Elliott Nugent, he wrote the Broadway comedy The Male Animal, later adapted into a film, which starred Henry Fonda and Olivia de Havilland. Life. Thurber was born in Columbus, Ohio, to Charles L. Thurber and Mary Agnes Mame Thurber on December 8, 1894. Both of his parents greatly influenced his work. His father, who sporadically employed clerk and minor politician who dreamed of being a lawyer or an actor, is said to have been the inspiration for the small, timid protagonist typical of many of his stories. Thurber described his mother as a born comedian and one of the finest comic talents I think I have ever known. Quote, "She was a practical joker, and on one occasion pretended to be crippled and attended a faith healer revival, only to jump up and proclaim herself healed." Thurber had two brothers, William and Robert. Once, while playing a game of William Tell, his brother shot James in the eye with an arrow, and Thurber lost that eye. This injury would later cause him to become almost entirely blind. Unable in his childhood to partake in sports and other activities because of his injury, he elaborated a creative mind which he then used to express himself in writings. Neurologist V.S. Ramachandran suggests Thurber's imagination may be partly explained by Charles Bonnet syndrome, a neurological condition that causes complex visual hallucinations in otherwise mentally healthy people who have suffered some level of visual loss. From 1913 to 1918, Thurber attended The Ohio State University, where he was a member of the Phi Kappa Psi fraternity. He never graduated from the university because his poor eyesight prevented him from taking a mandatory ROTC course. In 1995 he was posthumously awarded a degree. From 1918 to 1920, Thurber worked as a code clerk for the Department of State, first in Washington, D.C., and then at the Embassy of the United States, Paris, France. On returning to Columbus, he began his career as a reporter for the Columbus Dispatch from 1921 to 1924. During part of this time, he reviewed current books, films, and plays in a weekly column called Credos and Curios, a title that later would be given to a posthumous collection of his work. Thurber returned to Paris during this period, where he wrote for the Chicago Tribune and other newspapers. Moved to New York. In 1925, Thurber moved to Greenwich Village in New York City, getting a job as a reporter for the New York Evening Post. He joined the staff of the New Yorker in 1927 as an editor, with the help of E.B. White, his friend and fellow New Yorker contributor. His career as a cartoonist began in 1930 after White found some of Thurber's drawings in a trash can and submitted them for publication. White linked in some of these earlier drawings to make them reproduce better for the magazine, and years later expressed deep regret that he had done such a thing. Thurber contributed both his writings and his drawings to the New Yorker until the 1950s. Marriage and family. Thurber was married twice. In 1922, Thurber married Althea Adams. The marriage was troubled and ended in divorce in May 1935. They had a daughter Rosemary together, and lived in Fairfield County, Connecticut. He remarried in June 1935 to Helen Wismer. Death. Thurber's behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable in his last year. He was particularly so at a party hosted by Noel Coward and had to go back to the Algonquin Hotel. At 6 in the morning, Thurber was stricken with a blood clot on the brain on October 4, 1961, and underwent emergency surgery, drifting in and out of consciousness. The operation was successful, but he died, aged 66, due to complications from pneumonia which set in. The doctors said his brain was senescent from several small strokes and hardening of the arteries. His last words, aside from the repeated word God, were, "God bless. God damn," according to his wife Helen. Curiously, he had repeatedly predicted that when he was on his deathbed, his wife would be at the hairdresser. She had gone there to get away from the strain of his deathbed vigil and hastened back when told that James was sinking fast. Legacy and Honors. Established in 1997, the annual Thurber Prize honors outstanding examples of American humor. In 2008, the Library of America selected Thurber's story, A Sort of Genius, first published in The New Yorker, for inclusion in its two-century retrospective of American true crime. Two of his residences have been listed on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places, his childhood Thurber House in Ohio and the Sanford Curtis Thurber House in Fairfield County, Connecticut. Career. Uniquely among major American literary figures, he became equally well known for his simple, realistic drawings and cartoons. Both his skills were helped along by the support of and collaboration with fellow New Yorker staff member E.B. White, who insisted that Thurber's sketches could stand on their own as artistic expressions. Thurber drew 6 covers and numerous classic illustrations for The New Yorker. Writer. The last 20 years of Thurber's life were filled with material and professional success in spite of his handicap. He published at least 14 more books, including The Thurber Carnival, Thurber Country, and the extremely popular account of the life of the New Yorker editor Harold Ross, The Years with Ross. A number of his short stories were made into movies, including The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which is also regarded as one of the best short stories written in the 20th century. Many of his short stories are humorous fictional memoirs from his life, but he also wrote darker material, such as The Whip-Poor Will, a story of madness and murder. His best-known short stories are The Dog That Bit People and The Night the Bed Fell. They can be found in My Life and Hard Times, which was his breakout book. Among his other classics of The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, The Catbird Seat, A Couple of Hamburgers, The Greatest Man in the World, If Grant Had Been Drinking at Appomattox, The Middle-Aged Man on the Flying Trapeze has several short stories with a tense undercurrent of marital discord. The book was published the year of his divorce and remarriage. His 1941 story, You Could Look It Up, about a 3-foot adult being brought in to take a walk in a baseball game, is said to have inspired Bill Veek's stunt with Eddie Gadel with the St. Louis Browns in 1951. Veek claimed an older provenance for the stunt but was certainly aware of the Thurber story. In addition to his other fiction, Thurber wrote over 75 fables, some of which were first published in The New Yorker, then collected in Fables for Our Time and AMP, Famous Poems Illustrated, and Further Fables for Our Time. These were short stories that featured anthropomorphic animals as main characters, and ended with a moral as a tagline. An exception to this format was his most famous fable, The Unicorn in the Garden, which featured an all-human cast except for the unicorn, which doesn't speak. Thurber's fables were satirical, and the morals served as punchlines as well as advice to the reader, demonstrating the complexity of life by depicting the world as an uncertain, precarious place where few reliable guidelines exist. His stories also included included several book-length fairy tales, such as The White Deer, The 13 Clocks and The Wonderful O. The latter was one of several of Thurber's works illustrated by Mark Simon. Thurber's prose for The New Yorker and other venues included numerous humorous essays. A favorite subject, especially toward the end of his life, was the English language. Pieces on this subject included The Spreading You Know, which decried the overuse of that pair of words in conversation, The New Vocabularianism, What Do You Mean It Was Brillig, and many others. His short pieces, whether stories, essays or something in between, were referred to as casuals by Thurber and the staff of The New Yorker. Thurber wrote a biographical memoir about the founder, publisher of The New Yorker, Harold Ross, entitled The Years with Ross. He wrote a 5-part New Yorker series between 1947 and 1948, examining in depth the radio soap opera phenomenon, based on near-constant listening and researching over the same period, leaving nearly no element of these programs unexamined, including the writers, producers, sponsors, performers, and listeners alike. Thurber republished the series in his anthology, The Beast in Me and Other Animals, under the section titled Soapland. The series was one of the first to examine such a pop culture phenomenon in depth. Thurber's wit made it more than a sober piece of what would later be called investigative reporting. Cartoonist. While Thurber drew his cartoons in the usual fashion in the 1920s and 1930s, his failing eyesight later required changes. He drew them on very large sheets of paper using a thick black crayon. Regardless of method, his cartoons became as noted as his writings. They possessed an eerie, wobbly feel that seems to mirror his idiosyncratic view on life. He once wrote that people said it looked like he drew them underwater. Dorothy Parker, contemporary and friend of Thurber, referred to his cartoons as having the semblance of unbaked cookies. The last drawing Thurber completed was a self-portrait in yellow crayon on black paper, which was featured as the cover of the July 9, 1951, issue of Time. The same drawing was used for the dust jacket of the Thurber album, Adaptations. Thurber teamed with college schoolmate Elliott Nugent to write The Male Animal, a comic drama that became a major Broadway hit in 1939. The play was adapted as a film by the same name in 1942, starring Henry Fonda, Olivia de Havilland and Jack Carson. In 1947, his short story, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, was loosely adapted as a film by the same name. Thurber intensely disliked the film, which he felt had little relation to his story. Danny Kaye played the title character. In 1951, United Productions of America announced an animated feature to be based on Thurber's work, titled Men, Women and Dogs. The only part of the ambitious project that was eventually released was the UPA cartoon The Unicorn in the Garden. In 1960, Thurber fulfilled a long-standing desire to be on the professional stage and played himself in 88 performances of the Revue A Thurber Carnival. It was based on a selection of Thurber stories and cartoon captions. Thurber appeared in the sketch File and Forget. The sketch consists of Thurber dictating a series of letters in a vain attempt to keep one of his publishers from sending him books he did not order, and the escalating confusion of the replies. Thurber won a special Tony Award for the adapted script of The Carnival. In 1961, The Secret Life of James Thurber aired on The DuPont Show with June Allison. Adolph Menzies appeared in the program as Fitch, and Orson Bean and Sue Randall portrayed John and Ellen Monroe. In 1969-70, a full series based on Thurber's writings and life, entitled My World and Welcome to It, was broadcast on NBC. It starred William Wyndham as the Thurber figure, featuring animated portions in addition to live actors. The show won a 1970 Emmy Award as the year's Best Comedy Series. Wyndham won an Emmy as well. He went on to perform Thurber material in a one-man stage show. In 1972, another film adaptation, The War Between Men and Women, starring Jack Lemmon, concludes with an animated version of Thurber's classic anti-war work, The Last Flower. In 2013, a new adaptation of The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, starring Ben Stiller as the title character. Popular culture. Beginning during his own father's terminal illness, television broadcaster Keith Olbermann read excerpts from Thurber's short stories during the closing segment of his MSNBC program Countdown with Keith Olbermann on Fridays, which he called Fridays with Thurber. On an episode of Norm Macdonald's video podcast, Norm Macdonald Live, Norm tells a story in which comedian Larry Miller acknowledges that his biggest influence in comedy was Thurber. Bibliography. Books Is Sex Necessary? Or Why You Feel the Way You Do? 75th Anniv. Edition with foreword by John Updike, ISBN 006-073314-4. The Owl in the Attic and Other Perplexities, 1931. The Seal in the Bedroom and Other Predicaments, 1932. My Life and Hard Times, 1933. ISBN 006-093308-9. The Middle-Aged Man on the Flying Trapeze, 1935. Let Your Mind Alone, and Other More or Less Inspirational Pieces, 1937. The Last Flower, 1939, reissue 2007. ISBN 9781587296208. The Male Animal, 1939, and screenplay starring Henry Fonda, written by Stephen Morehouse Avery. Fables for Our Time and Famous Poems Illustrated, 1940. ISBN 006-090999-4. My World, and Welcome to It, 1942. ISBN 0-15-662344-7. Men, Women and Dogs, 1943. The Thurber Carnival, 1945. ISBN 0-06-093287-2. ISBN 0-394-60085-1. The Beast in Me and Other Animals, 1948. ISBN 0-15610850-X. The Thurber Album, 1952. Thurber Country, 1953. Thurber's Dogs, 1955. Further Fables for Our Time, 1956. Alarms and Diversions, 1957. The Years with Ross, 1959. ISBN 0-06-095971-1. A Thurber Carnival, 1960. Lanterns and Lancers, 1961. Children's books Many Moons, 1943. The Great Quillo, 1944. The White Deer, 1945. The 13 Clocks, 1950. The Wonderful O, 1957. Posthumous Books Credos and Curios, 1962. Thurber and Amp Company, 1966. Selected Letters of James Thurber, 1981. ISBN 978-0316844444. Collecting Himself, James Thurber on Writing and Writers, Humor and Himself, 1989. Thurber on Crime, 1991. ISBN 978-0892964505. People Have More Fun Than Anybody, a centennial celebration of drawings and writings by James Thurber, 1994. ISBN 978-0151000944. James Thurber, Writings and Drawings, 1996, Library of America, ISBN 978-1883011222-2. The Dog Department, James Thurber on Hands, Scotties, and Talking Poodles, 2001, ISBN 9780060196561. The Thurber Letters, The Wit, Wisdom, and Surprising Life of James Thurber, 2002, ISBN 9780743223430. Short stories: The Man Who Hated Moonbaum, The Black Magic of Barney Haller, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, The Night the Bed Fell, The Unicorn in the Garden, The Moth and the Star, The Rabbits Who Caused All the Trouble, The Macbeth Murder Mystery, 1937. You Could Look It Up, 1941. The Catbird Seat, 1942. The Secret Life of James Thurber, 1943. The Breaking Up of the Winships, 1945. A Couple of Hamburgers. The Greatest Man in the World. The Cane in the Corridor. If Grant Had Been Drinking at Appomattox. The Bear Who Let It Alone. The Princess and the Tin Box. The Dog That Bit People. The Lady on 142. The Remarkable Case of Mr. Rule. The Scotty Who Knew Too Much. The Night the Ghost Got In. The Car We Had to Push. The Day the Dam Broke. More Alarms at Night. A Sequence of Servants. University Days. Draft Board Nights. The Wood Duck. The Tiger Who Was to Be King. The Owl Who Was God. File and Forget. The Whip Poor Will. Mr. Preble Gets Rid of His Wife.